So at the moment, my local transit agency has both a fixed route and a paratransit bus service. And the paratransit service, for those of you who do not know, is a service for people with physical or mental disabilities that allows door to door transportation. So you do not need to go to a bus stop. Um, so in our fleet, we primarily use these. These are Ford ESeries van chassis with Glaval Primetime shuttle bus bodies. And these are retrofitted to run on compressed natural gas. And for the most part, they work great. They are set up such where it is, I believe, 12. I believe it's 12 people, 12 seated passengers, and two wheelchairs by default, or you can flip up two of the front seats to make for another wheelchair station. I believe in total you can have four wheelchairs. Um, so, for the most part, they work great, and at the moment, they're the only thing we have in the fleet. But there have been some occasions where they haven't necessarily worked out, and I've got two personal experiences. On occasion, I will give one of my relatives a lift, um, and particularly to the car dealership if they need to turn in the vehicle for maintenance. So there was this one time, the very first time that I did this, I had ParaTransit pick me up from the dealership. So what ends up happening? Well, the driver's not entirely sure how to get out of there. I'm not entirely sure how to get out of there. So what we end up doing is, now keep in mind the size of this vehicle. This is probably 23, 24 feet in length, about 10 and a half feet high. And we are basically trying to shoehorn our way through the new vehicle inventory lot in an attempt to get out. Once we realize it's a dead end, we have no choice but to back up. But you can imagine how much of a like I said, a shoehorn experience that was. Another time, we took paratransit to the airport, and they dropped us off at the airline. Um, and as we were unloading the luggage, this guard comes up to the driver and gives her basically the runaround. And as soon as we get off, she wouldn't even my relative who was with me at the time wanted to tip. And side note, you don't typically tip paratransit drivers. Everything's fixed as far as finances are concerned. But she wouldn't even accept the tip because she had to get the heck out of there because apparently she was not supposed to park there. Nobody told us that. So you can imagine, I mean, it's an awkward experience sometimes. I mean, 95% of the time, these shuttle buses, they work great. And again, like I said, what they do is they basically take a Ford E-Series van, a chassis cab, take away the front door, chop off the roof, and they weld the bus body to it. So basically the front end, all the motor, fuel components, all that, even the dashboard, is straight out of a Ford full-sized van like you might find from a hotel. But the bus body is completely of a completely different manufacturer. It's what they call incomplete vehicle manufacturing. So, like I said, for the most part, this works great. But what about the times when you end up, like I was mentioning a moment ago, stuck in those narrow navigation situations, or if you just need something, that's easier to drive? Well, paratransit, our local paratransit agency has had a couple of attempts at cracking this. One of which is the Braun Entervan, which honestly is, for this kind of application, it's my favorite. I know two people in wheelchairs, one of whom I was actually riding around in their van a couple of times. And I was just very happy with the amount of space, not just for them, but for myself. It felt like excuse me, it felt like the the minivans of old, the kind, excuse me, just had lunch, the kind that I grew up in, the kind that I just grew up in, and this thing was just fantastic, very quiet, comfortable ride, the works, just very, very nice. So ParaTransit bought about 50 of these conversions, and what they did was they ordered them with a singular passenger bucket in the middle and a bench in the rear, no front passenger seat, and no middle passenger seat on the right hand side. So the front section was completely open. The front right side section was completely open for a wheelchair. Now, there are a couple of trade offs. You only get 3 ambulatory passengers, or in the case of the van, 4. And why did I say 3? Well, you'll see in a moment. Um, Ambulatory passengers in 1 wheelchair. And because of the extended maneuver, the better maneuverability of these vehicles, the paratransit drivers tend to get swamped with various pickups. But again, like I said, it works well for those situations where, take the car dealership, for example. If you have to get out of there, we even had a pickup at a mobile home park, and we had to kind of shoehorn our way through there as well. So the shuttle bus that I showed you just a moment ago probably wouldn't be the best for that application, but something like this minivan would. And they kept them for about 5 years, and they were really nice. They were really popular. They worked out really well. When those went kaput, they tried something similar with this. This is a VPG MV-1. It's a purpose-built from the ground up wheelchair accessible vehicle. This is not a conversion. This is a purpose-built wheelchair accessible vehicle. I tend to compare the design of this to a cross between the London taxi cab and something General Motors would cough up. And I do apologize for the analogy, but it's just for the cough up thing. I don't know. I didn't like these. The drivers didn't like them. The main reason my local transit agency bought them was because they were had out of the box with a compressed natural gas fuel option. Our entire fleet has gone over to compressed natural gas. So, it makes sense. I mean, this was a purpose-built wheelchair vehicle. It was considerably cheaper than the wheelchair vans. And I know this because I was curious about how they put one together. So I went ahead and watched a video. Braun Ability in particular has some videos you can watch if you're interested. They also had their website, so I went to their website, and I actually built one of these vans like this one. And I came away rather surprised. The conversion alone was 24,000. Actually, it wasn't Braun Ability. It was VMI, Vehicle Mobility Solutions. And so their conversion was $24,000, and that's on top of the regular vehicle price, because the way they build these wheelchair accessible vehicles is they buy them stock from the dealer and then they tear them apart. That's the best way I can describe this. Is they basically tear the whole vehicle apart, minus the overall body frame, the motor. They keep the motor in, they keep the dash in, but everything else pretty much has to go. The trim pieces, the flooring, all of it. And what happens is they don't discard this. They keep as much as they can. Okay, so what they primarily take away is the floor. You've probably noticed some side skirts, and there's another picture that I'll show you in a little bit. That'll be easier to see. But there are some side skirts, and there's some lifting. For those of you who are old enough or are into cars as a hobby, it may look like something that has been lifted, like one of those hot rod lift type jobs. Well, that's necessary because they basically take the floor out. They lower the floor by about 7, 8, 9 inches, maybe 6 inches. I don't know. I'm not good at numbers. So they take them and take the floor, they lower it, and they also replace the material with a much more rigid uh, material that can withstand somebody in a power chair. Okay. So in order to do that, again, they basically have to rebuild the vehicle. That in turn causes some major problems, and if it's not done just right, these probably won't last very long. So, and like I mentioned before, so once all that is all said and done, you have the conversion process, which for this particular distributor was 24,000. Then you had about 30,000 for a brand new van, which was nicely equipped. You're looking at about $60,000 at least. So around $55,000, $60,000. Whereas the MV-1 here is about 30 or 5 or 40,000. Okay, it's 60 when you add in some additional costs of things that my transit agency wanted, and also the CNG conversion. That 60,000 on the van was without the CNG conversion. So why did they junk these? Well, first of all, the vehicles only last about 5 years before they decide to go belly up anyway. But the ride was really interesting. It was very bouncy. The CNG option wasn't necessarily doing um, fuel economy any favors, because I've heard a driver driving around in one of these little wagons, and he ran out of fuel twice. And my transit agency is basically operating 24 hours a day, so they have the drivers do 12-hour shifts. So it was one of those things where it's like, it was good while it's lasted. It was something, okay. But nowadays we don't have the MV-1 or any of the minivans, so all we have in our fleet now is these shuttle buses, which, like I said, for the majority of applications they're fine, but there are some instances where I've actually ended up holding my breath, not sure we would even make it through a tight spot. So I think that the transit agency should see about buying one of um, one of these more maneuverable options. I think that they should go back to buying these retrofitted Dodge Grand Caravans. And as I mentioned before, I was talking about how they build these. You have a better example of the side skirting I showed you. They have a step. You need a step to get into the driver's area now, because they want to keep the seat level with what the van used to be. Obviously for the driver to have the same kind of view. So they basically put the seat on a base, and the base can actually be wheeled out of the vehicle so that the person who's in the wheelchair, if they wanted to, they could even drive. But as far as ParaTransit's concerned, I really do think that it would be in their best interest to buy another fleet of these, because these were fantastic. The only thing I'm not sure about is whether or not they would be willing to do the CNG retrofit, because our entire transit agency, as I talked about a moment ago, runs on compressed natural gas, and they would need to spend the additional money in addition to the 60 grand to get it to run on compressed natural gas. But I don't know. I think that of the options out there, I would go with either that or this. This is the Ford Explorer MXV. It's been around for a couple of years, and I chose this photo so you guys can see what they've done to it. Much like the minivan, they had to rebuild the vehicle with a lowered floor and increased height for people in wheelchairs, but they also completely redid the rear door mechanism so that it behaves more like a minivan style door. But I really like this option. It'd be something new, something different. I think that the transit agency could do really well with these. That said, I've never actually been in one of these. I have been in the minivans, like I mentioned before, and there's tons of room in them, perfect for a person in a power chair. I don't know how much room the MXV has inside compared to the minivan, but on the flip side, that shuttle bus that I showed you before with the CNG upfit, I believe that is an option from Ford. So it'd be interesting to see what um, what they end up doing. But what are your guys' thoughts? What do you think? What do you guys think the transit agency should buy for their next fleet of vehicles? Because I don't know. I personally think, no matter what my wish list is, that they're probably going to end up sticking to these shuttle buses, even though I really do think they could benefit from something a little bit more maneuverable. Like I said, apartment complexes, um, mobile home parks. Not everybody lives in a nice open neighborhood, and for those that don't, maneuvering these buses through there can be a bit tricky. But what do you guys think? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.